Hello, welcome back to the playlist for this block of Cannon Street, and we are going to be looking at the 1891 census for some of the residents along here.
1891 census. We've got 8 to 10 Cannon Street. We've got William Walton, he's 35 and he's a general labourer.
Just for some context, on August the 31st, 1880, William Walton, who was 24, married Annie Wilde, who was 28. They were both single and they got married at the parish of St Paul's. So along with William, you've got his wife Annie, who's 38, and then you've got the start of their children. So Catherine is 9, Thomas is 7, Annie is 6, Jane is 4. I think that says William, who's 2, and then you've got John and Charlotte Foster, who are lodging with them, and he's a bricklayer, and they've got 2 children as well. So I know it was 8 to 10 Cannon Street at this point, so they must have joined the shops together. So it's a packed house. 10 years later, on the 1901 census, you've got William, who's a gantry man at the furnaces, and Catherine's a school teacher, and later she becomes a school mistress. So she obviously just dedicated her working life to educating children. But by 1936, we've got Catherine Walton of 4 Scott Street in Redcar. She died on the 23rd of July 1936 at Stead Memorial Hospital in Cortham, and here's a picture of the hospital, which closed in 2010. And she gave her probate and her will to her 2 sisters, so Annie and Violet. Thomas Walton died on the 14th of September 1950 in Nunthorpe. He spent most of his life as a moulder over in the industry. But he's recorded by his granddaughter as a farmer at the time of his death because he ran a chicken farm. Back to our Cannon Street block, and if we look at the Waltons' neighbours for 1891, we can look at another family towards the end of the block this time.
Then you've got 22 Cannon Street, John Rose, he's 52 and he's a fish dealer. Ah! Gonna buy a bag of fish. So 24 to 26 Cannon Street, you've got Thomas Hall, 44, and he's a hairdresser. Again, fire off.
So next to John Rose, at the end of this block, we've got Thomas Hall and his wife Mary, who's 39. And then we've got David, who's 14, who's a hairdresser as well. Something's going on here, and I'm not exactly sure, so reading between the lines, we have to go back to the beginning of this story, and it starts in 1876 in Sheffield. The story starts with Sarah Stanford, and she was born in 1852, and she's a domestic servant at the time in Sheffield, and she finds herself pregnant, and she gives birth illegitimately to David Stanford in Sheffield. So she's probably now looking for a husband, and on the 1881 census she's still a domestic servant, but the next year in Rotherham she meets hairdresser Thomas Hall. They have their own kids, and they then come to Middlesbrough, which is where we met them on Cannon Street.
Thomas Hall?
I do not know why on the census in Cannon Street Thomas's wife is listed as Mary. Maybe it's a transcription error. I do not know when it's supposed to be Sarah. So something goes on here, and the family splits up. And he moves in with his uncle, Jonathan Stanford, at Boundary Road. And Jonathan and David are on the 1901 census, so 10 years later. And Jonathan is a watchmaker, and David is due again. So he's 22 at this point, and he's helping his uncle out. And then it gets even more confusing, and on Boxing Day 1904, David Stanford, 28, a bachelor, a watchmaker, married Hagar Knight. And if you go across from David's name to see who he's put in the father section of the marriage certificate, he's put Sarah. Right, after taking a Valium, I've actually worked it out that David and Hagar moved by the 1921 census in front of us with their daughter Evelyn to Sheffield. And it says that his birthplace is Sheffield, so David Stanford's birthplace on the 1921 census does match David Hall, who's a hairdresser on Cannon Street. So they are the same person. Because Thomas is raising the illegitimate son of his wife Sarah, maybe that's where there's conflict between Thomas and David. Maybe he didn't want to be a hairdresser, or there's arguments as a teenager, and that's why Uncle Jonathan has stepped in and decided to look after him. And on the 1939 register you've got David Stanford and his wife Hagar living in Sheffield still. And if you look at the third person on the register, you've got Jonathan Stanford. He's a retired clock repairer. So even up to the Second World War, you have David thinking about Uncle Jonathan. So if anyone in David's mind was his father, it was Uncle Jonathan. David Stanford died in Sheffield in 1952 at the age of 76, and Jonathan Stanford died in Sheffield in 1956, aged 97 years old. That is a good run, and he's well deserved.